Hello, I am Eric Hutchinson. I'm the principal broker and owner of Hutchinson Realty, and this is video 25 of the Negotiating Your Next Home video series. I hope you'll go back and you'll watch some of the other videos in the series because we have covered a huge amount of topics in regards to negotiating your next home. We started off with the beginning of the contract and worked our way all the way through that, did a new construction contract, the seller's disclosure, the inspection, repair, and survey addendum. And this video is actually a continuation of video 24 that talked about the early occupancy addendum. Today, we're going to be talking about the delayed occupancy addendum. This is when the seller needs to stay in the property after closing. Now, I think that this is a great thing for a buyer to consider giving the seller when negotiating their home. In this market that we're currently in, it's a seller's market. And many times the buyer is competing with other buyers and they want their offer to look better than maybe another offer or another buyer. So I think that this is a great opportunity for the buyer to say, hey, Mr. Seller, we're going to give you a few days after closing, maybe a few weeks after closing to get out of the property and buy your next home or move into your next home. And I think that the seller sometimes will put a lot of value on that concession. So that's something for you to consider as a buyer. But let's get into it a little bit, shall we? So this is page 1. We're going to be going through pages 1 and 2. Pages 3 is just a signature page, and so we won't be going through that. But I did want to point out at the very top of this page, and it's kind of hard to read, but it basically says that this delayed occupancy addendum is not intended for any occupancy in excess of 60 days. So in other words, if the seller is going to stay in the property for more than 60 days, then you just need to do a lease agreement. This is only for occupancy for 60 days or less. And so let's get into it just a little bit more. I'm going to zoom in on item number 1. It just basically says that this addendum is for the purpose for allowing the seller to stay in the property after closing. And number 2 says possession of the property shall be delivered to buyer, and you have 2 options. Option number A is a specific date and time, and option number B is actually so many days after closing. I like option A better because it's more exact and tells us exactly when the possession is going to be given. But you can choose to say 3, 4, 5 days, 60 days, or whatever you want to. Item number 3 says seller shall pay to buyer the sum of, and I put in $40 a day. Now, it can be any number on a day-to-day basis, or this is an opportunity for the buyer to give the seller a break and maybe win the negotiating of the home by saying $0. So we're going to let the seller just stay in the property for a week after closing to get moved out. Sometimes the seller puts a lot of value on that concession. Let's move over to item number 4. That says this rental shall be paid as follows. So if you are going to charge rent, you're either going to do option A or you are going to do option B. Option A is the sum of whatever you choose to do. So if it's going to be a month, then you would take $40 a day times 30 days, which is $1,200. But whatever that total amount is, if you know what that total amount is and you know the seller's going to get out at a particular date, then you would probably go with option A because you know the seller's going to get out, and then either the listing company or a title company, a third party, will take that total amount of money and they will hold that until the seller gets out. If they get out before they estimated the time, then they get a refund of the days that they didn't stay in the property, but they're not allowed to stay in the property past a certain day. Now, if the seller doesn't really know exactly when they're going to move out, then you may want to go with option B that just says the actual rent amount due shall be paid directly to the seller to the buyer on the date possession is delivered. So the seller goes, hey, it may be 7 or 8 days, maybe 9, I'm not sure. And the buyer goes, great, why don't you just pay me the rental amount whenever you are moved out? And so that may be the option. If the buyer is going to charge $0 to allow the seller to move out of the property, then you would choose option number C that says that this is not applicable. Number 5 says the seller shall do no work on the property until after they give ownership over to the buyer, because it's no longer their property. They shouldn't be doing any work on the property unless the buyer has given them written permission. Now let's go over to the next page. Item number 6 basically says the seller agrees to carry the utilities in their name, which makes sense because they're living in the property. Item number 7 says buyer and seller are strongly advised to consult their respective insurance agents to ensure proper coverage, which this makes perfect sense, but sometimes buyers and sellers forget about this. The buyer actually is the new owner at closing, and so they need to have homeowners insurance in case the seller gets hurt while on the property, or in case there's a fire or a tornado or something, or a hailstorm. They need to have homeowners insurance because it's now their property. The seller needs to switch their homeowners insurance over to renters insurance to just cover their personal possessions. And so that's what item number 7 says. Number 8 says seller will be responsible for all damages caused to the property that would be intentionally or even by accident if it was the seller's fault. Now, if the air conditioner goes out, or if there's just normal wear and tear that happens, then it's the buyer's responsibility because the buyer is now the new owner. So it's just like the seller becomes a tenant. So the buyer would maintain the property, but if the seller does any damage to the property, maybe they're moving a couch out and they knocked a hole in the wall, then the seller would be responsible for that damage. And that's what item number 8 says. Item number 9 says the right of the seller to occupy the property shall be on a day-to-day basis. Now, this is a paragraph that basically says that the buyer has the right to give the seller notice to get out of the property within 3 days. They can say, hey, you're making a lot of noise, the neighbors are complaining, or you know what, you and I have had an exchange of words, and I just want you out of the property. And so they can give notice, and the seller would have to get out within 3 days. Option number 10, or item number 10, deals with things that maybe are not in writing in this addendum. For instance, the seller may say, you know what, I'm going to move out of the property, but I just like to store my furniture in the garage. Well, you could put that in here. The seller has the right to store their furniture in the garage for a week or whatever. So if there's other paragraphs do not apply, then you would write something in here that would apply to the terms that the buyer and the seller agree to. So that's pretty much it. I hope that makes sense. Again, I think this is a real opportunity for a buyer to win the negotiating of the home by giving the seller time to get out of the property. I've seen it happen several times, and so many times the seller puts a lot of value on having time after closing to move out of the property. They've got their money. Now they can go buy a piece of property, or they can just take their time moving out. And sometimes that's a big deal. So if you are competing with other buyers for the property, consider giving the seller some time to get out of the property. Hope you've enjoyed the video. I hope it's been good information for you. You can always reach out to me at info@hutchrealty.com, or you can visit our website at hutchrealty.com. I hope things are doing well for you and your family. Have a blessed day.